Caitlin Clark had not played competitive basketball in what felt like forever, and the wild part is that when she finally stepped back onto the floor, she did not ease into the game at all. She did not come out hunting shots, try and force a highlight, or looking like someone shaking off rust. Her first impact came through pure control. On her first 3 touches, she delivered 3 assists, and from that moment on, the entire feel of the game changed. That is what made this debut so striking. It was not just a return. It was a reminder. The pace changed. The floor opened up. Teammates started getting cleaner looks, and the whole thing instantly felt like Caitlin Clark had been gone for months, but somehow had not missed a beat. That is why this performance became such a huge talking point so quickly. According to the Game Reaction and the numbers being discussed afterward, Clark's senior team USA debut ended up being so productive that people were digging back through years of international basketball records try to place what they just watched. That tells you everything about how unusual this was. She was coming off a long layoff, stepping into a new stage, sharing the floor with other elite young stars, and still managed to make the game revolve around her playmaking almost immediately. Not because she was ball dominant in a messy way, but because every possession started making more sense once she got involved. And honestly, that may be the most impressive part of all this. Most players coming back after that much time away from real competition are cautious. Their rhythm is shaky. Their timing is late. They are thinking too much. Clark looked excited, composed, and ready to move the ball the second she got in. That matters because the pressure on her was not normal pressure either. This was not some quiet return where nobody expected much. She came into this event as the most talked about player on the roster, the one whose name was being used in promotion, the one the crowd was clearly waiting to see, and the one everybody was watching before she even checked in. That kind of spotlight can make a return harder. In Clark's case, it looked like it made her sharper. Before the game, she had basically said she expected to feel the nerves, but more than anything, she was just happy to be back playing real basketball again. That mindset showed up the moment she stepped on the floor. There was no visible hesitation. The reads were there. The tempo was there. The confidence was there. And what stands out even more is that she had already framed her role in a very team-first way. She was not talking like someone expecting to walk in and dominate every touch. She talked like someone who understood this stage was different, that Team USA has talent everywhere, and that she would need to fit into something bigger than herself. Then the game started, and somehow that self-awareness and team-first approach ended up making her even more dangerous. The game itself had a lot of debut energy around it, because Clark was not the only player experiencing this level for the first time. Paige Buchers was there. Angel Reese was there. Kiki Irifen was there. Several players were stepping onto the senior national team floor for the first time. So there was a natural question about whether the team would look disjointed early. Instead, once Clark entered, the offensive flow became one of the biggest stories of the night. That is the kind of thing numbers do not fully capture, even when the numbers are already huge. She did not just collect assists. She sped up recognition. She made the right pass before the defense could settle. She turned pressure into opportunity. And that is where the talk about the records really started. The way the game was being discussed after the fact, Clark's 19-minute outing was not just efficient, it was historic. She finished with 17 points and 12 assists. And the most jaw-dropping part of it all was how clean it looked. The ball was in her hands against pressure, traps, and aggressive defense. And she kept making the right decision. That is why the zero turnover angle became such a big part of the reaction. High assist games usually come with a little chaos. You take risks, you push windows, you accept a few mistakes because that is the price of ambitious playmaking. Clark was pushing pace and still looked under control. That is why people were talking about 5 different FIBA records being touched by this one performance. The first big headline was that she reportedly set the all-time mark for assists in a Team USA senior national team debut, men or women. Then there was a broader claim that no player from any country had ever recorded more assists in a senior national team debut. On top of that, her total landed among the best single-game assist performances in FIBA qualifying history. Then came the bench angle, because she did all of this as a reserve rather than a starter, which made the achievement look even stranger. And the first half assist total, paired with 0 turnovers, turned into yet another layer of just how absurd a debut looked in context. Now, whether fans were focused on the exact record list or just the eye test, the conclusion was basically the same. Clark had come back from a long absence and instantly looked like the most dangerous offensive organizer on the floor. That is not the kind of thing you can fake for one night. You can hit a few jumpers on adrenaline. You can get hot from deep for a stretch. But you cannot fake the way an offense changes around a point guard when the reads are coming that quickly. Her connection with Ryan Howard was a perfect example of that. Howard finished with a huge scoring night, and a lot of that was built directly off Clark breaking down pressure and finding her in rhythm. Those were not random assists. They were the kind of assists that rearrange a defense. That is what made Senegal's pressure almost work against them. The defense was designed to create panic in the backcourt, to speed up the offense in a bad way, to force ball handlers into mistakes. Clark treated it like an invitation. Instead of surviving the blitz, she turned it into transition offense. Instead of retreating from the trap, she split the timing of it with quick decisions. That is a different level of control. It is one thing to handle pressure. It is another thing to make the pressure look like the reason your team is getting easy looks. That is what separated her shift from the early moments of the starting group. And that brings up one of the more interesting parts of the whole night. Clark did not start. Carl Lawson opened with Chelsea Gray at point guard, and on paper that is a totally understandable decision. Gray is a veteran, a champion, and someone who has run elite offenses under big pressure. Nobody is going to act like starting her was some outrageous decision. But once the game unfolded, the contrast became impossible to ignore. The starting group struggled more with the early pressure. The rhythm was not the same. Then Clark came in, and the game tilted fast. Her first few touches immediately created baskets. The tempo lifted. The defense looked more stressed. Team USA felt less like a talented group trying to settle in and more like a team that had found its offensive engine. That is why the post-game comments from Lawson mattered so much. She was clearly complimentary of Clark, and she did not hide how important her playmaking was. She talked about Clark being one of the most dynamic offensive creators in the world, and she specifically pointed to how that second quarter group reached a different level once Clark started driving the action. Those are not throwaway compliments. Those are meaningful coaching comments, especially in a setting where lineup decisions are still fluid. Lawson also used the phrase fact-finding mode when talking about rotations and combinations, and that line tells you a lot. It tells you the starting lineup is not locked. It tells you the staff is watching who changes the game, not just who looks good on paper before tip-off. And that matters because after this debut, the starting lineup question becomes very real. When the player coming off the bench immediately generates the best offensive flow of the game, the discussion changes. It is no longer just about experience or balance. It becomes about ceiling. What does this team look like when Clark is not just a change of pace option, but the opening tone setter? What happens if Team USA lets her organize from the start instead of waiting for her to rescue the rhythm once she checks in? Those are fair questions after a performance like this, especially because Lawson herself sounded very aware of what Clark unlocked for the group. The other big thing this game did was show the generational shape of where Team USA could be going. This was not just Caitlin Clark making a splash. Paige Buchers looked comfortable. Angel Reese had her own productive moments. Kiki Iriafen brought energy and finish. Other new pieces fit in. The team did not look like a collection of names taking turns. It looked like a roster being built toward a future where pace, skill, spacing, and multiple creators all matter. Clark just happened to be the clearest example of how explosive that formula can look when it is fully functioning. That is why the larger takeaway goes beyond the opponent. Yes, a blowout like this always raises a question of how much can be learned against that level of competition. That is a fair point. But the most important thing here is not just the margin of victory. It is the structure of the offense when Clark was running it. That is system-level information. That is about tempo, reads, confidence, spacing, and how teammates respond when they know the ball can arrive at any moment. Those things matter regardless of who is on the other side. And if you are an Indiana Fever fan, that is probably the part that jumps off the screen the most. This is a version of Clark people want to see over and over again. Not just the logo threes, Not just a headline-scoring burst, but the full offensive conductor version. The player who makes everybody else easier to play with. The player who punishes pressure with precision. The player who can rack up assists without turning the ball over and still score efficiently herself. That is the version that changes a season, not just a game. So when you step back and look at the full picture, the story is actually pretty incredible. Clark returned from a long absence, entered a senior national team setting loaded with expectations, came off the bench, and almost immediately became the most important offensive player on the floor. She did it while sharing the stage with other major names. She did it while the crowd and cameras were clearly locked on her. She did it while being asked to fit into a team-first environment. And she did it in a way that reportedly rewrote several FIBA records in a single night. That is why this was more than a good comeback. It was a statement. It said the time away did not slow her instincts. It said the international game does not scare her. It said she can return from injury and still control tempo at the highest levels of women's basketball almost instantly. And maybe most importantly, it said that if Team USA is serious about maximizing what this roster can become, the ball probably needs to be in Caitlin Clark's hands a lot more often. Because after a debut like that, the question is not really whether she is ready. The question is how quickly everyone else is ready.